Hello, mate. Hello, mate.
Hello, mate.
I see you're in the Blue Peter Garden, are you, mate?
Yes, we are in the Blue Peter Garden with all the family. Say hello.
Oh, look at that. Honestly, to be honest, it looks like someone's just dropped a dirty bomb and you're all, you've all been wiped out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we've got the weather at last. Woo!
I know. Shorts. Oh, you can't see, luckily. Shorts, t-shirts, been in the garden, bit of Devonshire weather. Is it like that in smoggy London as well, mate?
Well, we're nowhere near London, so I wouldn't know. Yes, mate, right. It is lovely. 30 miles north of London. It's really, really, really nice. But I'm not going to show you my spindly little white legs.
No, I've got similar, to be honest. Yeah, Frontline chat should be. Before I forget, we've got a couple of things. I've got a Saturday I can't make. Sorry to everyone. But Dave, if you want to crack on your own, mate. But trouble is, it's going to be tricky because I've got all the software.
Exactly. Without you, Harry. So
well, it goes without saying, doesn't it? I know. Some people will think that's serious. Dog trainer to speak dog, and that's good as well because the writing's not the wrong way around or anything. So I often wonder. No, it's correct. It's right. And is that? I suppose it would be like that. Why do I think writing would be opposite way around when you hold stuff up and all that? I hope.
Yeah, but that's the wrong way round because I'm not pointing that way. I'm pointing the other way.
No, it's all very confusing. Fortunately, we do have a guest on. Hopefully, they'll turn up. I did check the link earlier, and it was fine. Who is? She's Tanja. Tanja is absolutely phenomenal. Tanja Conway Grim. And she's very clever.
Very clever.
And she's autistic. And the reason I say that is because she's done a lot of work with autism. And basically, she's helped with Sussex Police, liaison and diversion services, who now screen those coming through and find 1 to 2 weeks. And when you're talking about people who are arrested, and then certain things that come up are absolutely fascinating because, and I can remember several instances now. If you speak to someone as a police officer and say, "Can you tell me your name?" A autistic person may well say, "Yes, I can." And then the police officer, and I can remember circumstances saying, "Oh, okay, it's a bit like that, is it? We're being a bit cheeky, bit funny, are we?" You know, sort of thing. And no, they genuinely, you've just asked them a question. Can you tell them their name? And they can. So it is very much. She says, "Harry, you've got to ask me direct questions." And say, so don't sort of. She doesn't cope with insinuations and vagueness and stuff like that. You'll find also you have a very. I was chatting to her this morning, and she was hilarious, really funny as well. So hopefully she's not in the green room yet, but hopefully she will be. Mate, what's been going on with you? I know you've got a superstar in your midst.
Tia's been busy this morning. She was doing an interview for our local ITV news channel, ITV Anglia, which I think's going out either tomorrow, Monday or Tuesday evening, just talking about her dog training, really, which she's really, really enjoying. She's a real natural at it. She spends, most of her time studying dog training and behavior, and I think she probably knows more than I could ever know.
I know you're being humble because she's no doubt got that interest and that the knowledge from your good self. I know I was watching a bit of video on her because Arthur still gives it rocks to the front door, and I thought there's no way I'll be able to stop that. And I watched a little video where she was training where someone comes to the door and the dog gets a treat on their mat when that happens. So now the door. I think I didn't see the end bit because I had to go, but I suppose the association with the door is, "Oh, treat at my basket," and it stops that absolute reflex action.
Changing their conditioned response to a certain stimulus by giving them something else to do instead, and it can be very powerful. If your dog's been practicing it for a little while, then you do need to spend quite a bit of time undoing it. But anything like that can be, very, very powerful. And I say that the research she does is way beyond her years, but she just absorbs. She's at that right age. She just absorbs it all in and practices it, and then finds her own little way. So fingers crossed for the future for her.
Well, I mean, she's a superstar in the making, and she's going to help an awful lot of people and help a lot of animals, which would have probably had a very sort of frustrating and maybe a life where they were passed on from one person to another, or dog homes, when actually she'll be able to support the people so they can, the owner and dog will have a much happier life together. Kel, that's interesting. That's happened with my daughter. It comes across rude, but they can be very literal, and that is the fascinating aspect to it, without a doubt. I am fascinated because there were certain other examples in my policing career that I've had. One involving the roof bar lights. So if you can just remind me with that when we talk. But it's like when she says she was asked in an interview once. So tell me a bit about yourself. And she said, because initially she said to me, well, what would you like? I like direct questions. And because I said, it's not going to be like your conferences. It should be a lot easier. It's just like three people down the pub sort of thing. And she said, what my biggest nightmare is? 3 people down the pub socializing. She said, I need structure and I know what's saying. My conferences, I know exactly what I'm doing. I know what's saying. So she prefers sort of direct questions. But then what you do find is that natural conversation does go round, and she's very funny as well, very entertaining.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. It should be absolutely fascinating.
Exactly, mate. Go on.
And just a new insight into that world. I know at the work at the moment they're slightly different, but they're talking about dyslexia and trying to get officers to come forward if they think they do have forms of dyslexia. And even when I'm sort of sitting and writing and typing and reading reports, sometimes I struggle. So I have no doubt there's something going on up there that perhaps I need a little bit of support with.
Yeah. Well, I sort of embraced my thing. I don't think I've got anything. I can be quite abrupt. I can't be bothered with all this fanning around and all this sort of where people and people say, "Oh, you're very pragmatic and all that," and I'd sort of. But I don't think there's a name for whatever. It's just the way I am. I just can't be. But there was a guy that had broken down outside Exeter, and it was a dangerous position. Oh, great! Tanja's just joined her. I tell you what, she's got the best virtual backdrop. She can hear me now. There is, and honestly, and you think it's virtue. And she said she was in a conference with someone recently in the NHS in a Zoom meeting, and it looks virtue because you'll see it in a minute, virtual. And then her cat just came out of the scenery and jumped on her. So it was brilliant. But anyway, I was talking to this guy, and he was a university student, and he was we're talking about ADHD. And he says, I'm studying this thing. He says, but I'm utterly convinced that everyone has got a little bit of everything. And it's just that your autism is up there, your ADHD is down there, but somebody else's, and some people's they're quite low on everything. And it's not you have autism or you have ADHD. It is, we love to put things into sort of categories, don't we?
You look at the education system of old. I'm sure it's changed now, but they wanted people that thought in a certain way. And then you got companies like Google and Microsoft and Elon Musk's companies that actively go out and look for people who think in a different way, in a different plane, and it is people with autism and ADHD and dyslexia, because they think, I don't want to say different because that's not the right word for it, they think on a different plane, and that's where these incredible new ideas come from. I'm not sure what spectrum Elon Musk is on, but he's clearly slightly different in his thinking, and look how incredibly successful
and things like the Enigma codes and things like that, isn't it? GCHQ, I know, is a large section of them are autistic. So it's something now we're sort of realizing perhaps isn't a disability anymore. It's just we need to recognize it and not misunderstand it. So that's why I think this guest Tanja today is particularly good, because she's so natural at putting things across and explains things so easily. And you start thinking, oh, I remember when, now I realize why I think that happened, So, right. Anything else going on in the world at the moment? There have been a few things, but we want to keep it light, don't we? If we can.
Absolutely. I can't think of anything else. There's a couple of firearms cops, wasn't there, who were involved in an RC accident in Wales. So we send our thoughts out to them.
Indeed. Indeed, mate.
Amazing results out there. Lots of
and luckily, our paramedic friends were very nearby at the time when it happened, so they were able to, while the officers were still in the car. So, and they're not they're outpatients, luckily. So that is good stuff. As I say to a lot of people who you turn up at their collision and they feel absolutely distraught by it all, and you just say it's only bent metal and broken plastic, and all be replaced. So that's the main thing. And but cool. Sharon Devine, thank you very much. Hi, Harry and Dave. Now specifically, right. Oh, okay. GCHQ now specifically recruit for neurodiversity. I know. They'd be fools not to, wouldn't they, really?
That was one of the departments you said that Tanja liaises with in Sussex, wasn't it? Neurodiversity.
Oh yeah. Well, we don't know how much we're allowed to go into that. We'll see. I have learning difficulties and having it hard to trust anyone, and the police don't know how to handle people like myself. Stephanie Warren, thank you for coming on and joining us, because that sort of information is very relevant, and I think because it's so relevant, because we need to now bring Tanja Conway Grim on before she completely wrecks our green room with there's a couple of bottles of wine in there. She actually, live from a jungle, we're bringing on Tanja. Welcome, and thank you.
Thank you very much for asking me.
Dave, meet Tanja. Tanja, meet Dave.
Dave, really lovely to meet you.
And you
right. Well, and it was lovely. Thank you so much. And I'm trying to remember, Tanja, when I originally met you, and I think it was because you offered to proofread my new book thing or something. When did it start?
It was before that. I contacted you about suicide in police officers. And we had a long chat about that, and it was linked to the work I was doing, a project. And then we stayed in touch, and then we met again at it was some kind of virtual event, and you were holding up Arthur and I was holding up my cat. We were kind of sabotaging the whole thing with animals.
Which is always a winner. And
and that's when we started talking again and talking about your book, and then we.
My goodness! Yeah, you see, I'm terrible. My spatial awareness of time and things. Sometimes I don't remember if something happened 2 years ago or 1 year ago. It's just. It
was actually 2 years ago, Harry.
Was it? There you go. Honestly, I'd make a useless copper. I tell you. But tell you. So what we're going to do? We're going to talk to you about certain aspects, but. More than for me than anything. I mean, first of all, I'm just going to say to everyone, you are a very clever person because you've got a lot of, you obviously like studying and you learn a lot of stuff, but this is practical stuff. And you actually were learning forensics. You had a particular interest in forensics. What is it, Tanja, that made you interested in that side of things? Was there anything specific?
Well, I think you have to start before that. I actually grew up partly in the care system. And in those days, a long time ago, they didn't really care about your education. So I left secondary school after 2 years. No qualification, nothing at all. So that kind of impedes your progress in life just a little bit. Yeah. So back in my 30s, a newly single parent with 3 young children, I decided it was time to do something about my education. So I embarked on degrees and things like that, which was not easy when you actually haven't even got a GCSE to your name or the equivalent. And after I did my honours degree, my undergrad, I was very interested in forensics, always had been. So I thought it'd be really interesting to explore it further. I went on a site visit to what was to become my university. And I just fell in love with it. I walked onto that site, which is the Defence Academy. Sure. And it's a military site. And I just loved it. Everything was very ordered, very structured, very clear. And it's totally, I was like, I can do this. And so I'll be happy here.
Oh, my goodness.
And so I went there for that reason. I just felt comfortable in the environment.
And
as well as being a good school.
So this is interesting. Do you think it was particularly because it was military and so structured that you felt you that's fascinating? And you just often, Dave, how many times have you heard, Dave, about people who, well, my brother did a degree when he was a teenager, and he lives in France and did that. My other brother decided to do a degree in his late 40s, and my sister did her degree in her late 40s. And my brother's now doing education, child education. He's done a higher degree, and sometimes it just grabs you. But you, Tanja, so you had no qualifications at all, but you suddenly realised that. But you chose forensics, didn't you? That was the bit
I
that
did. So I did a higher national diploma before that, and an undergraduate degree. But then I wanted to go further than that. So I chose that, and they had the right kind of course that interested me. And I think it was that whole safe structure as well, because it's a closed site. It's a defense academy. Military personnel from all over the world come there. So it's very much a guarded area. So I felt safe. There were no members of the public there. Yeah. There is no crime on site at all. So it felt like a really, really safe place to be. So, yeah, I absolutely loved it there.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, I wasn't particularly academic. I think I was probably quite clever, but actually I couldn't cope with the structure. But now in my later days, I think just maybe I am ready to do something like a degree, because my brain will allow me to be much more structured than it ever would allow me to be when I was younger. And of course, that's what makes us all different, I guess. We do have very different different brains and ways of thinking, which is something I'm an expert at, Tanja.
And then Tanja, you now have looked, and we'll fill in the bits of gaps in the morning, in the middle, but you sort of regularly present workshops now and training sessions on autism, neurodiversity. I'd like to just know what that is. Yeah. What is neurodiversity?
Okay. It's called the neurodiversity spectrum, and all it does, it describes a number of conditions that could be things like ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, OCD falls under it, and the autism spectrum conditions, as well as something that's known as acquired neurodiversity. For instance, if somebody's had a stroke or has sustained a brain injury, that has changed their wiring, if you like. So they are different to where they used to be. And autism itself is a lifelong neurodevelopmental condition.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be a disability, though for a lot of people it is. And it affects everybody different, because everyone is unique. So you go from the one range, and yes, Elon Musk is on the autistic spectrum as well. So Elon Musk, Anthony Hopkins is, very successful, hugely successful people, to people who need 3 carers 24 hours a day to meet their needs. So the spectrum is huge, and it's also what's known as a spiky profile. So I am very good at certain things, and other things that you probably wouldn't think twice about are virtually impossible for me. So it's very spiky, and that is very typical of autism.
Wow. And it's led to sort of misunderstandings as well, hasn't it? And I was just saying before you were coming on that there was a sort of circumstances where I say, can you tell me what your name is? And you said to me, and you'll probably get an answer of yes. And I would then say, well, no need to be cheeky. It's clear I want to know what your name is. When you're saying, well, why didn't you ask what my name was then? And then negotiations can break down. And before you know it, it's been misunderstanding. And I think it's really important. The work then you did in Sussex Police, what did that involve? And it was around custody, wasn't it? And what did you do with them?
It started off as with my association with the National Police Autism Association, and I came across the autism passport that the Metropolitan Police Service, the BTP, the NPAA and City of London Police produced, which was a really brilliant passport. So I thought, I want our own Sussex version of that, with Sussex Police and a local NHS trust and local councils on there as well. So I contacted through the MPAA. I managed to get in touch with the diversity team of Sussex Police. So together we worked on the Sussex Autism Passport, which was launched this year. Yeah. And then they said, oh, look, we're actually looking for somebody to do some training to our custody sergeants on autism. I said, yeah, sure. So we developed that and have been doing that for nearly a year now. And it's been hugely successful. And from from one thing came another. So actually, they then said, we're actually going through a major refurbishment programs of all our custody centres.
Yeah.
Can you, put some input? So I put him in touch with Nottingham Police, who've done a very big project on that, and did some consulting around it. And I gave them the research that was out there, and they've been absolutely amazing. They have truly taken everything on board, changed so many things. But what has been really fun for me was to get feedback, not just from autistic people who've been detained or their workers, their key workers, but also from custody sergeants themselves, who have commented to the inspector in charge that actually they love the changes as well, because who likes the bright flickering lights, for instance. So every centre should now have a interview room and a consultation room where you can dim the lights. And it seems like a really small change, but actually it's really important. Autistic people are really sensitive often to lights.
So will they actually carry a passport, or do the custody staff give them the opportunity to explain their autism, or how does it work?
Oh, yeah, no, that's a really good question. The inspector in charge, takes me around the various centres, and nosy as I am, I kind of pick everything up. So I picked up this thing called the custody checking-in sheet, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And I looked at that and said, you don't ask the question about autism on here. Yeah. And so they changed the sheet. So now it's specifically asked, have you got any alert or medical cards on you? Are you autistic? Have you got Asperger's or ADHD? So the minute somebody comes in, they are asked a question. And then with the training, the custody sergeants and the custody staff are much more familiar with what they should and shouldn't do. And on top of that, we also produce the Autism Guide to Custody, so that when an autistic detained person comes in, they should be getting a customized guide to custody, specifically aimed at autistic people and just for that center. So everything therefore becomes predictable. You know what the next thing is going to be. You will know what the cell looks like before you get into it. And that really helps autistic people, making it predictable. So you have a much calmer atmosphere all round.
That seems to be the key thing, isn't it? Is that that level of expectation, you need to know what's going on. Where Tanja, it was that thing we said about, don't worry, it's just like three people in a pub having a chat. And you sent me a message. You said that's my worst nightmare. And because I like structure, I like to know. Whereas I would prefer to go into. People ask me, can we do this live interview thing? Would you like to see the questions up front? I said, no, I prefer not to see the questions up front. It's more natural for me. Yeah. And yet I notice, yes, you like to know what some questions are, but when I'm talking to you, we're quite happy. It's very natural. I don't know how hard you're working behind the scenes.
Very hard. It's known as masking. And that is particularly common amongst autistic women. So you're pretending to be something you're not, in effect. It's not that healthy, really. But it's very important to understand, particularly as police officers, because what you see is not what you get. So somebody might be telling you about something horrible they've done, and they'd be smiling. You're thinking, wow, callous, so-and-so. But actually, they don't necessarily can show what you are feeling, and that can be a problem in healthcare, in mental health care, and in interactions with police. Often what is being said is more valuable than the body language would say.
And that's the opposite from, they say that only 7% is what you say. Everything else is like, I'm using my hands now. It's my expression. You can see whether I'm aggressive or friendly or whatever. It's almost like, no, I want to hear the words coming out of your mouth. I'm just looking at that comment below. School bully once asked my daughter, who are you looking at? She stared a lot. She just said, you.
Great answer. I love it.
So, I did say to Dave before, saying when you were in an interview and they said, don't mind me bringing it up, they said, well, tell us a little bit about yourself. And you said that's really bad question to ask someone who's autistic, isn't it? What would you prefer for an interviewer to say, I want to find out about Tanja. how do I find out a little summary without knowing nothing or everything?
Now that's really difficult when you're dealing with an autistic person.
Yeah. Okay.
Clear boundaries is really good. So you could say, if you were interviewing me and you wanted to know about my qualifications, you would start with my name, Tanja. I'm now going to ask you about your educational qualifications. So you've used my name. I know you're talking to me. You've told me what you're going to ask about approximately, and then you go in specifically and say, can you tell me what was your favorite subject at secondary school? You've given me a really specific question that I can answer quite easily. Yeah,
Dave, I'm going to be marking you, Dave, on your see how much you approve, and you can mark me.
Okay, where it can go really wrong, and this happened to me, and it was a bit embarrassing. I was a finalist in an academic poster competition. Yeah, these things actually exist. And the judges then come round and ask you about your poster. I thought, great, love it, brilliant, all excited. She comes round and she says, can you tell me about your research topic? Well, yes, of course I can. This is what I love. 20 minutes later, I was still going strong. She had meant in like 2 minutes, but she hadn't said that. Had she said that, I would have done that. But because it was open, I thought, great, somebody wants to know what I've been doing. And off I went. So if you're really specific, it's really helpful. And the research that has been done around this, which I found fascinating, is that when they made questions autism friendly in job interviews, actually everybody performed better. Whether they were autistic or non-autistic, but autistic people improved the most, so they were nearly, but not quite level with non-autistic people. Only 16% of autistic people are full-time employed. And it's not because they haven't got the qualifications or the skills.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned
minds out there. But just talking about body quickly, because Harry mentioned it just now. So body language is really important to me. In fact, I'm probably a little oversensitive to body language. And I train dogs, and they're incredibly sensitive to body language, their own, each other's, and ours. Is that something? Does it depend on the autism as to whether that's important, or is it not important? Do you struggle? Do some people with autism struggle with body language and the signals that we all give off?
Often, yeah. But if an autistic person comes into contact with the police, they would really often display what you would regard as suspicious behavior, avoiding of eye contact, which I can do because I taught myself as a child, because I realized it was expected. So I forced myself and I can do it, and it looks quite natural, but isn't really. And so that might be kind of quite evasive behavior, being very fidgety. You're thinking, what's this person got to hide? Well, actually, they're in an anxious situation. Anxiety is a real problem with autistic people. So what happens within autism is that people often misinterpret the person's behavior, but autistic people can also misinterpret other people's both intentions and a lack of understanding, and that can be really detrimental.
Well,
and funny as well sometimes.
Well, yeah, and that's a good point actually, because sometimes it's funny, and then sometimes you said it's not so funny. And the not so funny one here is Jill has mentioned here. Last month in my county, a man having a mental health crisis was killed in an officer-involved shooting. The police did not recognise he was autistic. Family have filed a lawsuit. Now, I think definitely needs to come in. Another story I have is Tanja is not a question.
Thank you for clarifying that.
So you can relax now. You can relax. You don't have to think. Okay. So a story I have is I went to somebody who was walking on the dual carriageway, and it was actually in Exeter, and it was on the off slip of the dual carriageway. It was a long, sweeping, wide off slip. And so I took the car there, and I stopped the car behind, and I just casually walked up to them and said, hello, can you just, why are you here? Legally, they're able to be there, actually, but it's really, really dangerous where they actually were. I said, so everything all right? And they just looked at me and they said, can you turn your lights off on your car? And I went, I'll tell you what, I bet I went like this. I went, it's like random. No, they're there to protect us. And he said, I really need you to turn your lights off in your car. And I thought, okay, that could have gone two ways. So I went, well, okay, I can turn the rear lights on. And so just the rear lights are on and not the front lights, because I don't really need the front lights. So I switched them off. Now, I spoke to Tanja about this a little while ago, and I said that I didn't know until now was probably autistic. And she said, and I'm going to speak for you now, Tanja. What you told me was that, okay, that person is saying, I want to know what you have to say, but I can't concentrate with those lights going. Can you turn those lights off so that I can then concentrate on what you have to say? So, Tanja, is that familiar to you with that sort of thing happening?
For instance, the other day I was in a medical consultation and I had to say, do you mind if I turn the lights off? Because I could not focus. No. The lights were so painful to me. Sensory sensitive, hyper or hyposensitivity is very common. And that's why things like an autism passport or an alert card or a carer that goes with you can be really crucial to get the best out of whatever situation it is.
I remember dealing with a chap, and again, I don't know if this was autism because it was a while ago, probably when we had much less of an understanding in my role anyway, where the guy said, look, I can talk to you, but please don't touch me. I know you need to talk to me about something. I'm not going to run away, but please don't touch me. And I'm guessing, that's probably the similar sort of thing. Whilst I wasn't touching him, he was able to engage. And as soon as anyone got too close, he was like, you know what, I can't deal with this any longer. Just give me a bit of space. I'm not going to run away. I'm not a threat to you, but please don't put your hands on me. So
that's nearly 100% somebody who's on the autistic spectrum, but luckily was able to communicate that specific thing to you. Imagine if they can't, or people don't take it serious.
Exactly. I would imagine,
but also, how do you search that person? And there's different ways you can approach it, so you can effectively search someone without distressing them. And that's some of the things that I, work with the police on, that they understand how to do it.
Tanja, could you actually tell us then what an example of that would be to engage with someone, to be able to search them like that?
Okay,
is it a bit too involved, or can you give us a clue?
No, it's really easy. Piece of paper, you draw a stick figure, or you have, in custody, or any investigating officer will have like a body map where you mark injuries. So you have something like that, and the person can draw on there or indicate, now these are areas I will punch you if you touch me there, because that's how. And obviously, we'll try and avoid those areas. Or you can use to say, look, we need to search you, and this is where we need to touch you. Are you okay with being touched there? And they might say, well, actually, no, but you can start negotiating. And for a lot of people on the autistic spectrum, it might be the first time that somebody has actually shown that care and consideration. And that goes a long way to creating a relationship or connection that you can actually talk about it. Well, I do really need to, touch your arms. But if we start here and we work slowly down and you start communicating, and it's that going two ways that is really important.
Yeah. And if there's any drug dealers listening to this now, because they're probably a big part of our, don't just say you've got autism so you don't get searched, okay? It's not going to work.
You still get searched. But it's about the communication, preparing, making it predictable and familiar. And that's, again, you're clearly communicating, you make it predictable, you make it familiar. And those are really key words.
And Maria here has said, having worked with autistic teenagers, and I think this is the key thing, to have knowledge and still treat them normally, like as if they're not weird, they're not strange, they're normal human beings. So having worked with autistic teenagers, the biggest issue a lot of them had was that people often tried too hard and ended up treating them very differently to what we deemed to be normal. I spoke to them as human beings.
Absolutely. I often say to autistic people I work with, I just say, you're normal. You're a bit different. Or you can say we're normal and they're a bit different. It's which way you like it.
I think that's what's happened over the last few years. Like Harry said at the beginning, people like GCHQ and Elon Musk's companies and Google and Amazon and people like that are actively in their advert, in their recruitment, are asking for people with these different ways of thinking, because we need it to evolve and move on, because they do I don't want to, like I said to Harry, I don't want to say they think different, because that's not right.
They do think differently. That's the strength. If you think about originally what diversity meant, we meant men and women, right? Then diversity started to include race and culture and religion and sexuality. Now it also includes neurodiversity, so a different way of thinking and being. And that ability to think differently is really crucial. Yeah. If you think about GCHQ and, for instance, cybersecurity or computer coding or things like that, which I know nothing about, to be fair, when you think the strengths of autistic people, which is often a great attention to detail, a hyper focus, really visual thinkers often. If you're thinking about spotting mistakes, errors, as Harry knows, proofreading his book, but also in computer code, it's crucial. It's absolutely. And also, autistic people often don't like change. So imagine you have a person and you give them a job that other people think very boring. They find very soothing because it's predictable, it's familiar, it's very clear structure, and it's always the same. You know, it works both ways, doesn't it? It's the person you want on that desk. And GCHQ actively recruits people on the autistic spectrum and with ADHD. For that reason, they think differently, they think outside the box, and they have skills that other people just don't have.
So I was talking to someone who, I don't know if they are, and they don't know if they are, but I was speaking to someone who's saying on their way to work, it might be just because they're just a bit more observant than I am, but on their way to work, they got a repetitive got to be at work at a certain time every day, and they know the traffic light sequence, and they know this certain set is 2 minutes apart. So it could be 5:58 and 10 seconds sort of thing. And in at the o'clock and 10 seconds, the lights will have cycled round, right? So he knows that if he's a little bit late, he knows if they turn, he's got 2 minutes. So he knows doesn't need to rush because he's going to make it anyway. Now, I wouldn't be able to do that. I'd think, oh, if I've been lucky with the lights, I'm never lucky with the lights, you know. And yet he works the sequence. And they also knew a thing of, there is a bit of a funny story here, and this person will remain nameless at the moment. But they were coming back from work and they were on the bus and they were chatting to a female work colleague. It's just a friend and things like that. And then he decided he needed a number two, right? And he desperately needed number two. And the bus was another hour. So he knew that he got off the bus and he went into a subway meal thing. He went to the loo, but he already knew that if he crossed the road, went down the street, he could get another bus number that would take him down to a meeting point where his original bus would come. He then got back on his original bus and sat down next to the girl. Now, there is no question to you there, Tanja, but it's an observation to me, and I think, wow, that's autistic, surely. Or is it, Dave? Do you think that's observant?
That's a Sherlock Holmes thing, that is.
Yeah.
That's what Sherlock Holmes does in the first episode, with Benedict Cumberbatch. That's exactly what he does. He does the shortcuts.
That's a good point, because he could have, instead of doing number two, he could have done a murder and then...
Oh, there you go.
Been on the original bus, so it couldn't have been him.
Yeah,
wow.
There you go. Creative
there you
crime,
go.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring in... Go on, Dave.
I remember as a teenager, I guess, watching the film Rain Man, which was probably the first time I was ever introduced to autism. Now, I guess he tried to portray it at the further end of the spectrum, but he'd obviously spent time with people with autism. And so he'd learned that certain people had certain skills. And of course, one of the famous scenes is where a box of matches is dropped and he's able to say within a few seconds how many are on the floor, and they say, Tom Cruise is in it, and he says, oh, that's silly, that's rubbish, and then the waitress says, no, there are 13 matches left in the box. He's absolutely right, but he counted it like that, and that was the first time I think I was introduced to autism, and just how incredible the skills that these people have.
Visual, yeah. So Rain Man is a really bad example of what it's like to be autistic. But what it did demonstrate is that visual skill, that really quick thinking, the visual skill of seeing a pattern, boom, just like that. That is very
pattern. You
typically...
mentioned mentioned pattern before.
Yeah.
So is that part of the uniformity, that pattern, looking for that pattern? And
often autistic people will look for a pattern, or they like patterns. So they might like also collecting things like birds. Like to see lots of different birds. Might remember strings of numbers. For instance, children will often remember number plates. Think train spotting. It could be all sorts of things. But pattern recognition, when you're thinking about cybersecurity, is really crucial.
See, Dave, is this ticking stuff off? Like for me, Dave, this is like, so that's why some people you think, oh look, plane spotter, what's the point? You know what? And then you suddenly think it's that uniformity. GCHQ, it's that coding, it's that patterns, it's bringing like the Enigma code and things like that. Somebody said here as well, question, how can this awareness and way of dealing with people be rolled out across the forces, setting a new standard of care and caring? Tanja, there's only so many of you, so you can't spread it around to everyone.
There is actually a really good book.
Yes.
Here it is.
Whoa.
Autism and the Police. Absolutely brilliant. Written by a retired autistic police officer who also worked as a custody sergeant. He's also a member of the National Police Autism Association. If you're a member of the police, you can join for free. And there's loads of information available there as well. But it's hopefully forces are rolling it out. Sussex Police happens to be absolutely brilliant and responsive in that respect. They've also got something called the Pegasus scheme. So it's like a card somebody carries, and it has a 4-digit pin on the back. So if I were to call 999 and I say, I've got a Pegasus card, they'll ask me for the number, and that would link to a file they have that the police and I have put together about me, and that will tell them exactly my communication needs, but also what things would really upset me. So what would help in communication. And that means that somebody can then be appropriately supported. And there's lots of different cards around, but Pegasus, Sussex has that, and a couple of other forces. So there can be really effective tools, but training is crucial for people to understand how to communicate, how to be with somebody, what to do and what not to do. It's really important.
Fascinating. And I guess we're learning all the time, aren't we? We must be learning more.
Totally.
We haven't stopped with our understanding of where autism is, and how it can help with developing where we are now. Because if we haven't got different thinkers in the world, then we're never going to move on and evolve, are we? So
it's a very dull world. It would be very dull, wouldn't it? Maria, you say in the question here, or a statement, the thrill of watching people that have human skills issues work with animals is immense. And this is the point. It's absolutely true. Animals don't judge. They deal with what's in front of them at the time. And you get what you see, don't you, really? There's no sort of worrying about an animal's feelings sort of thing.
Well, an animal won't lie to you normally. Well, I've had a horse that was a little bit naughty, but no, little. I do believe cats lie as well, but most animals don't lie, all right? They also don't judge you, which is great. No. And they are quite straightforward in the communication. It's a very honest communication that they'll give you.
Yeah.
But that not judging you is really important. When you're autistic, you're 1 in 100. You are different to 99 people around you. You're seen as weird, different, loner, whatever. I have yet to come across an autistic person who wasn't severely bullied. And often autistic people may seem very distant.
Of course.
But often they're hyper empathetic. They are super sensitive. And to always be bullied and worse can lead to suicides, and has led to suicides, even among very young children. And the youngest case I know that was in the papers was an 8-year-old boy who had a very serious attempt on his life because he was bullied so severely at school he could no longer bear it. 8. I mean, that is disgusting.
It is. And is that why? Because you've been quite involved, Tanja, with missing persons, haven't you? And is there a link that you find quite often with that? Or is it just another interest you have?
It's an interest I have because I went missing, particularly when I was young. And I think the first recorded police involvement was when I was about 1.5. In those days, of course, people didn't have phones, remember? There was one phone on the whole street. I'm that old, very long time ago.
Yeah.
And it was after...
Well, we were there. We know it.
I'm not sure about that. But I know from looking back over the records that I went missing and nobody would think to call the police, which is, in this day and age, you can't believe this. But then everybody, check the coal sheds. That's where she normally is. Because I was so scared of the world because I was like in an alien planet. I couldn't understand it. So I would go and hide away in nice dark places like coal sheds. So you normally can pick me out of there and wash me off. But I realized I was being found. So age 1.5, and I have a very long memory going way back before that even, is that I decided to properly escape. And I did. So I climbed up all these things to open up the garden gate and off I went. And I wasn't, they didn't actually find me. It was some teenage girls on a bike that thought, what is this little toddler doing on the edge of a very busy road? Got to pick me up, stuck me on the back of their bikes. This was in the Netherlands, everyone cycles. Took me home, and I thought, what do we do with this child?
Stick her in the coal shed.
So
That's where she usually is.
They then had to find a telephone to say to the police, we have found a child. And then eventually somebody from my street phoned the police. And it must be the same one. So an interest from that point of perspective as well. So I'm very passionate, which is why I'm involved with Locate International, which is a community interest company that looks at long-term missing people and cold case homicides. So they review them on behalf of the police, and they work with this extraordinary group of volunteers who are absolutely fabulous. And we discovered that our most successful volunteer investigators are in fact autistic. So that's a piece of work we're doing around that, around autistic detectives, around autistic investigators. Do the skills that autistic people bring actually make them outstanding detectives?
So I'm looking at the Cranfield site here, and there's a paper with your name on it, which is about the certain location of body deposition sites and the role of windthropping and other innovative approaches. And in there you talk about man trailing and stuff like that. And was that just an interest of yours, or is it the ability of people with autism to notice, because we talked about patterns already, those differences in the environment, because obviously that's what windthropping is, isn't it? It's that looking at that environment and thinking, what's different? Where could that body be?
It's thinking differently. It is also, I took quite a few years to complete the work because there was other stuff going on as well. And it's that tenacity to keep going, that focus on details, to think outside the box and to think whether other search techniques used in different fields may have an application to something else. So it's thinking outside the box, and that's a great, it's a very typical asset of neurodiverse people.
It's interesting because you just said things. Sometimes finding a solution is to look at it the opposite direction. So you're looking about, right, how do I get to town? I need to get to town to see this person and things, and I have my car's broken down and I can't, and the bus isn't it. And then you think, well, turn it on its head. How do you bring the thing to you? Oh, hang on a minute, we can actually change this. So it's actually changing that mindset. And yet autistic people probably do it very naturally. You say, well, clearly you can't get there. You have to come to you. But we can...
Not always, because don't forget, a lot of autistic people are quite reluctant to change. So they don't like things. So this happens when I'm driving. Road ahead closed. I won't mention the expletives that then springs to mind. Because unless I know the area really, really well, I will at that point abandon the journey and go back home.
So here's a question.
I can't do it.
For you then, Tanja. Every year in our most forces, I'm sure, there's kind of self-assessment which your bosses have to sign on you. They always talk about your ability to change, and reluctant to change is seen as a negative. Well, how does that then factor into autistic people that we employ? Surely that's putting them at a disadvantage, and we should stop talking about this reluctance and actually help
I think this is an issue that within the National Police Autism Association is discussed quite regularly, that assessments within police are not necessarily very autism friendly. Yet, I would think that if you actually survey every single police officer in the UK, you'll find that a higher proportion than in the general population are actually neurodiverse and autistic. Because there's a lot of pros to the police. If you're autistic, you have a uniform, it's very structured, it's very clear, even if you're on response, if you like. There's a certain structure there, and that is very attractive. But some autistic people, particularly when they're younger, they might have a fascination for the emergency services, which is expressed in a slightly different way, such as setting fires to things, because then you get the blues and twos out, or to do something weird, so you get arrested, so you get interviewed, and it's exciting. And Andy, in his book Autism in the Police, actually describes really beautifully a case about that and how he dealt with it to make sure that person wouldn't kind of keep coming to the attention of the police.
That's interesting, because I remember there was psychologists. We had was it part of Trident? We had basically psychologists who's in control rooms, so that they were really helpful, saying like, here we are, this is thing. They could look up their previous, their medical records and go, oh, okay, and we were sort of directed, be very black and white about it. Don't give any empathy, almost. I mean, I might get this a little bit wrong, but it was basically they were enjoying the moment, and if you made it as sterile as you could, then it was less likely to feed that sort of addiction that they had. So it's make sure they're safe.
Yeah, so it could be something like, actually don't arrest them, but saying, we'd like you to come into the station for an interview later. And totally dressed out. No uniforms, no bells, no whistles, really boring room. Make it really boring and none of the excitement, if you like. And that can actually, often with autistic people, if you're really clear and explain very clear boundaries, particularly when they are on that verge of getting into trouble, it can be really helpful, because nobody might have ever told them, and this is part of bullying, and it certainly happened to me in my secondary school, is that the other children quickly copped on that I would not understand their intentions. So they could make me do things in school that I had no concept of, that I shouldn't be doing. And I would get into trouble for it. And they had a great laugh, because I could not understand they were setting me up. And that is something that happens quite regularly.
So much coming out of this chat today, and you must be as well, Harry. We are thinking, oh my God, I've seen that. And I've seen people take advantage of people, and I've dealt with people like that. It's fascinating. But this whole neurodiversity thing, to me, I think is absolutely fascinating. I've said for a long time that I think dog handlers are like a different breed. Now they'll always be the normal people, but I really do think they are. They struggle to sit in an office environment and sit and push paper around a desk. And their brains are built to do things differently. I'm a very visual learner. I can't read a manual and learn from it. I can, but then I need to see it. And once I've seen it a few times, I get it. And this neurodiversity thing is absolutely fascinating.
And I just want to say, if anybody who's watching would like to test themselves, well, not test themselves, there is a screening tool you can use. It's called the AQ10. And you can just put that in a search engine, and it's 10 questionnaires, as the name would suggest. And it's a screening tool. It doesn't tell you whether you're autistic or not, but if you score 6 or above, it's probably worth having a chat with your GP about it. And it's very effective. We used it, again, in Sussex Police with the Liaison and Diversion Service. They started using that, and as a result, they're sending 1 to 2 people a week now for an assessment.
Amazing. Maria, those clear points.
Whilst Harry's talking through this point, just put that book up for us again as well, because I know someone said literally just bought it off of your recommendation.
Great. I don't get any fees for that, by the way. Andy,
I think Maria did, Yeah, Maria says those clear points was what we had to focus on when explaining what was being taught. I had to interpret and sometimes find a whole different way around explaining stuff in class. I think as a teacher, was that, Maria? I'm wondering. But you could tell immediately is by directing that question and saying, like, Dave, you know, what is it that you, because now just you're highlighting the fact that you're not just talking like generally like I am now, because that might be just a grey fug. And now you've got to concentrate, because I'm going to ask you a question, Dave. but another way as well is you're just summarising what you want to say and then pin it down to then be more specific, which is really, really wise. What is it? When did you realise then? And was it an epiphany? Tanja, when did you realise then that this was really happening? I know it's really cumbersome and I'm really obvious with it, but I'll get better.
That's all right. I will try and explain. I was actually originally diagnosed, as it turns out, when I was 2.5. This is back in the 60s. It's extremely rare at this point in time, or that point in time, for girls to be diagnosed. And it wasn't given the term, and I'll explain it in a minute. But anyway, girls, of course, couldn't be autistic, so swept under the carpet, forgotten about. And I grew up knowing I was very different, being told I was very different, and normally being told I was mad or bad. Yeah. So for decades, I believed that I was either mad or bad. I wasn't quite sure. And then I thought, no, I'm not. I'm a good person. I'm a nice person. So then I convinced myself I must have a brain tumor, because that would explain everything about my life. If there was a brain tumor, that's why I was different. So all we needed to do was for me to get a brain scan to show, and then everybody would understand and be nice to me, which is a bit of a sad way to live your life, actually, thinking that's what it must be.
Yeah, that's what you're hoping for.
Yeah, kind of that would explain, you know, why it's so difficult and so different for me. Then I came across a person, I have to be really careful here, that I had some significant difficulty with.
Right.
And I thought, I really hate you. And I wasn't quite sure, but everything about this person started to annoy me. But then I remembered the really wise words from a lovely, lovely person I met many years ago, who said, if you really seriously dislike things about a person, they're actually holding up a mirror to you. What you don't like in them is what you don't like in yourself. So I thought, okay, mirror. And I thought, holy shit, I'm just like them. So, and that person was autistic. And I thought, And so I was thinking, I was doing a bit of research. I went to the GP for about 8 years, always denied. They always said, oh, no, you're not autistic. And then by chance, I came across that original report from 1967. And they had a word in from a pediatrician that described me. I thought, odd word, never heard of that. Doesn't sound very nice.
Yeah.
Tried to Google it. Didn't work because it doesn't translate into English as to anything meaningful. So I had to access Dutch medical papers in the medical library to work out. There was one paper that mentioned that word, and it was associated with Dr. Hans Asperger's. And all of a sudden, like, oh, yes. Now that makes sense. So I was diagnosed at 2.5 and then eventually re-diagnosed as 52.5 in the same month as the original month. So exactly 50 years later. Yeah.
Wow.
So mad story, but true.
And it means that you've been able to surely embrace it, to own it, and it's must be a lot more enjoyable, doesn't it now? But before it was constant.
When it happened, when I realized I got the official diagnosis, I was actually at first really, really angry. I thought,
oh, really?
And that was known 50 years ago. Imagine how different my life would have been if I had understood, and if people around me had understood, because of all the things that happened as a result. Now I embrace it, and I'm very passionate about training other people in it, so that things like safeguarding and support are put into place for people to help them, and to also realize that you are normal. You're absolutely fine. You know, you're not different. Well, you're different, but you're not weird.
And in fact,
are different,
you're slightly.
And you've got something to bring.
You're slightly superhuman as well. If you can count matches that drop on the floor like that, then you are slightly superhuman.
That is fiction, Harry. That is fiction, right? That is fiction. I can't do that, but...
Right, I'm not interested in it anymore. That's it. I am, Tanja. All right. No.
I take things literally. Don't do this to me.
I know. This is what you got to think. I know.
It's like saying to me, it's raining cats and dogs. I will say, really? And I know it can't rain cats and dogs. And I will still look for it. It's hopeless.
It's great. It's just fantastic. Look, It's 16:59.
I know. I want to say, Tanja, thank you very much for sharing your journey and trying to explain it so that the rest of us mere mortals can understand. And thank you for trying to bring change for other people, because it's all very well that you figured it out for yourself, but you didn't stop there and you carried on. And we've only covered a very small part of your life and your degrees and stuff like that. There's so much more. She
is officially the cleverest person I know, and another person I respect wholeheartedly is Janet Butler. If you follow her on social media, it sounds like diversity groups and forces should be inviting Sussex police along to deliver some lectures. Exactly, I think. Yeah. But we need this best practice, don't we, Tanja? Is that sort of college of policing? Should they be sort of bringing things together?
Yeah, but it's interesting. For instance, the regional counterterrorism advisory groups, which is a collaboration between the regional counterterrorism policing and, if you like, members of the community. They have embraced neurodiversity as well, because I sit on our local one, and it's wonderful how they have this incredibly wide variety of people from all sorts of backgrounds. And I think that's also important to mention about autism. It affects every culture and every race in the world. It's not a one thing, it's all over the world across all regions. But like the RC tags, they are really brilliant at making sure that they have included neurodiverse people within the neurodivergent, I should say, people within the advisory groups as well. And we hold them to account, and we act as their critical friends. And being neurodivergent is a really useful skill to ask difficult questions, for instance, and to see patterns and things like that. So it is embraced at certain levels, but as a whole, I think each force should definitely, through their diversity teams, which hopefully all forces have, actually actively engage and organize training for all parts of the police, not just custody, but response and everywhere.
Well, it's sparked a lot of stuff in my past career that I think, yes, that would have been it. That people I've met and things. And thank you so much indeed. What I would ask you to do...
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure, Tanja. What I'm going to do, we're just going to end it and then just see you for a minute afterwards. If you just hang on where you are, okay? Yeah. And thanks ever so much. Oh, next week, it's my fault. It's my father-in-law's 70th birthday party, so I'm going to have to go to that. He's a lovely guy. I'm going to enjoy that. And also then the next week, I might be doing a little G7 stuff. So it's 2 weeks we're missing. Can you bear not being with us for 2 weeks? But anyway, it's been emotional.
For 2 weeks, Harry. So have a lovely week.
I know, mate.
Thank you so much.
Cheers, guys.